That slaps. Does Christian nationalism have a negative connotation because of what some think to be a bad thing for America? If you think about it, it's Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals out at play. Are we nationalists or are we just citizens? Find out more today on the Self-Evident Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Self-Evident Podcast. You got Massey, you got Mike. We're welcoming you today to our show in honor of all the migration, the freedom of the people. Sorry, I went there because have fun, okay? Welcome to the Self-Evident Podcast. You got Massey, you got Mike. We are here to tell you that we're going nowhere. That's right. We are not nationalists, actually.
We are not nationalists.
We're not Nazis.
No, definitely not.
No, we're American citizens is what we are, and we ascribe to the laws that have already been written. So we're going to talk about that today and more. Guys, if you have not gone to theselfevidenttruth.com, theselfevidenttruth.com.
Why haven't you?
Well, yeah, 1. 2, if you have not subscribed.
Why haven't you?
Yeah, 3, if you have not bought a t-shirt, become a torchbearer, or even supported us.
Why haven't you?
We have a job to do, folks, and we need your help to do it. So theselfevidenttruth.com, go on there. Also, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere where your podcasts,
shoot, Rumble,
anywhere where your podcasts can be outletted. We pretty much are everywhere.
Yeah.
SoundCloud. Please be a subscriber. It costs nothing to subscribe, costs nothing to comment on. Also, if you have ideas for the podcast you guys want us to cover, please either comment on a video or email us at selfevidentministriespodcast@gmail.com. You guys can totally do all that.
Why haven't you?
Well, you're right. See?
But also, we did just send out the newsletter yesterday. So if you are a self-evident faithful and you're like, man, I want to see the newsletter. I want to catch up.
I ain't never got no newsletter.
Well, now's your chance. It's sitting in your inbox. Why don't you go and open that and get all the goodies that are in that newsletter?
Check your junk drawer in case, too. If
yeah,
your junk
your junk drawer.
I don't know why I said that.
It's kind of
Shut
true.
up.
It's true.
Shut up. Anyway.
If we need like soft, like Nerf balls that we can throw at them.
Tomatoes. Tomatoes work too. This lighting is really good on my tan. It brings out the Mexican in me.
It's really what we're trying to do.
That's what we're trying to. Yeah, the cultural appropriating look, aesthetic.
We honestly, you're just our token Mexican. So
I'll take it.
Okay, cool.
I'll take it. Anyways, so we were talking the other day, actually yesterday. I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Hobbes wrote a book called Leviathan. And I'll do a sermon on this. We'll do a topic on this one day, where the spirit of Leviathan is what overtakes an entire system. So a lot of people talk about the Jezebel spirit and like how they come in to infiltrate and they're always get close to leadership and they want to insert themselves and they're overbearing and dominant.
And it's always individualistic.
Always individualistic. Whereas a Leviathan, I've only heard it a few times, and it's always attributed in the church. Like the church, there's a spirit of Leviathan where like if a true leader like an apostolic calling can turn Leviathan if they are not checked by God, if they don't have the fruit of the Spirit. It turns into domineering. It turns into lording over people. It's just a dominating spirit. However, I think we've done a gross disservice to only apply that to the church. I think...
And believe that doesn't have a factor influence.
When you look at the Jezebel spirit, and the reason why I did that is because we overuse that term.
Overblown all the time.
And that spirit is pride, basically, right?
And maybe somebody just wants to participate and put their hand to something. Like
they just don't know how, yeah.
Right. Sometimes people
are
overzealous.
Yeah, it's overused. Yeah. But we don't realize that Jezebel thing was a governmental thing.
Right.
Like it was the wife of the king. It wasn't a church issue, right? And I know where they get it from, Revelation. You tolerate Jezebel, you do all that stuff. But same thing with Leviathan. We don't think about, if we were teaching that that spirit can be in government, it would cause us to be active more against government. So we started talking about that, and I started talking to Mike about, isn't it crazy that that same spirit or that thing that's operating in our government, thinking that they're above God, thinking that they have all the answers, how demonic then what they release is socialism. It's not your kids, it's our kids. Right. So they start to take away the authority of what God gives us. And there is this distinction that we want to get across. One, the church has a role in society. God called it the pillar and the ground of truth in Timothy. The church is the one who feeds the poor, heals the sick, raises the individualism and the collective body coming together and helping the poor, helping those in need. True religion and undefiled is this, that a man visit the fatherless and the widow, and he keeps himself unspotted from the world. In the book of James, the church has a role to play. It's the compass of the society. It's the one that keeps the morality. It's the one that says, hey, we cannot by force people to be moral or good. We depend on the Holy Spirit and the blood of Jesus to change and transform that soul to walk in morality. Then there's this entity God ordains called government. Paul Garner, don't do anything right now. Just listen to me, okay?
He's warming up the keyboard.
Romans 13 says that the authorities that are given are ordained of God, the powers, the structures, the situations. Do we want that? Was that originally intended? No. The Hebrew Republic was man and God. There was no leader above them. However, men are sinful, so we do. But then it's so stupid because then we set up governments and we elect sinful men, just like us, to run a government. The only job that government has is force. But the force that they're supposed to use is not against the good. It's only supposed to punish the evil. Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, Titus 3. Their job is to enforce the law. Christians' job is not to force people to be a Christian, but to turn the heart. And look how they work for each other. If we turn the heart, then they don't break the law for the government to use its force. However, when we see immorality prevail and sins that are unto death, like it says in Hebrews, like murder and such and such, if that's where government comes in to clean up the streets so that we have less of that, they put them in jail or whatever it is, so that the church can function and flow, so that there's no schism, right? But you see it now where government has become church. Government has become divine. Government has become the purveyor of all things that are scriptural. So you want to know when it's become tyrannical is when the church has now given authority to a government to do what the church is supposed to do.
Right.
See?
And we're going to draw a really good analogy of this in a second. And he's alluding to this is how you can look at it, and I think he'll put it all in perspective. But we're using the sense of Christian nationalism. Something else had popped up on this recently, right? I can't remember, because we had the event a couple of months ago, and I've got the journalist in here, but I'm asking, like, wasn't there something that sparked? Was there recently this term came back up or came back around? Maybe.
I want to say it was like a Candace Owens thing. I think they're just like going after.
Okay, yeah.
So they're going after her. And the reason why we brought up Christian nationalists, I was telling Mikey, I said this is what the ungodly do. Racism. Bible calls it hatred in your heart against your brother. We've now labeled it racism.
Right.
When we're Christians and we believe that rights come from God, all of a sudden now you're a nationalist. Why are they doing that? Because when the left likes to label, I'm saying the left in its entirety, I'm saying the progressive movement or whatever. The reason that they label is because it makes it easier for them to attack. If they can label, they can assemble the forces and attack the thing that they're going after. If they don't label it, they don't know what to attack. So they start to do this thing called nationalism. And you know what that does? It lumps in the Trump supporters. It lumps in just normal conservatives. It lumps in people who just love America in one thing. If you guys believe the same thing, you're all nationalists, right? And you're like, what the heck is a nationalist? And then there's some people who justify, yeah, I'm a nationalist, I can do this. It's like, I don't think you know what you're saying.
Right. And it obviously is very close connotation to that dangerous world from Germany 1940s, right? Like, it's so easy for the brain to go nationalist. Nah, right? Like, it's very easy, and so it's a very useful word for them to use. Now, let's use some context, because I think journalist Heidi Przybyla. I'm so sorry, Heidi, if I've mispronounced your name.
Przybyla.
Przybyla. We'll go with that.
Heidi.
So you guys probably remember this, but I think this is a great jumping off point to point out, okay, how should we as Christians, we believe, how should we look at this? What is the role of government? What is the role of the church? How do they interact, right? She said, the one thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different. Notice how she gave you that out. She's like, well, you could just label yourself as a Christian, and that's okay. We're really just going after these Christian nationalists. Says, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. What?
And that's where a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon and they went to the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which means God gives us rights. Samuel Adams said that in a court case in 1841, that the laws of God are the same as applied to the laws of nature, and that they're under God and our rights come from the Lord. John Dickinson said, kings or parliaments can give us rights essential to happiness, that we claim them from a higher source, from the King of Kings, the Lord of all the earth. They're not given to us by parchments or seals. They're born with us and exist with us by the decrees of providence, he said. John Adams said that we have rights antecedent to all earthly governments, rights that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws, rights derived from the great legislator of the universe. Benjamin Franklin said, freedom is not a gift bestowed upon us by other men, but bestowed upon us by the laws of God and the laws of nature. The founders were very explicit on this is a truth that God gives us rights. Just because there are Christians that don't know that does not mean they don't believe that. Read Genesis. When he told us to go populate the earth, to go and subdue the land, to be with the animals, to tend them, all that stuff is life, liberty, property. God gave us those authorities. As a matter of fact, read the state constitution of Florida. I read it the other day on the show. Rights cannot come from man because then rights can be taken away by man. What God gives us, no man can take away. As a matter of fact, that's what John Dickinson said at the end of that quote. Our rights cannot be taken from us without first taking our lives because they're given to us by God, is what he said. So to say that we're Christian nationalists because we believe that is, first off, wrong. I'll tell you why. It's just being a Christian that believes that. I'm a believer of Scripture that God gives me the authority to go and subdue the land and possess it, to go populate the earth and possess it. Read Jeremiah 29, chapter 4, or verse 4, I mean, chapter 29, verses 4 through 11. Go plant fields. He gives them the authority to go do those things. That's not a nationalist position. That's a Christian position.
Right, and this label of Christian can get very watered down because so many people use it as, well, my parents went to church once in a while and I went to church once in a while.
Yeah, I'm a
must
Christian.
be Christian. Right, and we'll get into some of the stats that they give. A major survey that's kind of getting touted as this is the example of Christian nationalism. And they show you that the more you study and seek the Lord, the more you're involved in Scripture, the more you're in love with the Lord, the more likely you're going to realize your rights come from God, not from government, right? Now, slide 2. The Federalist also reports in one tweet posted on X, she claimed there are different wings of Christian nationalism and they are bound by their belief that our rights come from God. Boy, that's horrible. How dare we? And seemingly insisted that Christians who support pro-life policies are Christian nationalists. She said, if you are Hindu, Jewish, this might help you to understand the next part of my point, which is they are using this for a man-made policy agenda, which distinguishes this from other Christians who leave these God-given rights at our inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness versus banning abortion, contraception, etc. Because that's what it always comes down to. But you notice the switch she did? She said, oh, our Hindu friends and our Jewish friends. You do realize other religions also recognize that God's authority supersedes governmental authority. I mean, look no further than Sharia law. I find it very interesting that she didn't use Muslims as an example, right?
Which, look at Michigan, by the way.
Right.
Did you see those chants and stuff they were doing this weekend?
Oh, I didn't see
last
that.
weekend. They were literally coming out and like, if Biden supports this, we're like death to America kind of thing.
I did hear about that.
Yeah,
it was
this
like
is
a
happening.
Palestine protest.
And it's
or
funny
whatever.
because people were warning me for years about watch out for the Muslims, and I was like, the Muslims, and I got it, I understood it, but dude, like, the amount of them that came in unchecked and they came under the radar. Oh, they're just happy Muslim people. All of a sudden now they're chanting death to America in Talib's district.
Yeah.
She didn't condemn it, by the way.
Oh, heck no.
No, of course.
Heck no.
They make excuses. You're racist. You're racist for wanting me to do that.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
And she does another thing. She switches it, and she says, who leave these God-given rights at our inherent right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So now she's trying to do a twist. She's saying, well, our God-given rights are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But all this other stuff is just man-made policy. Notice, Declaration of Independence
I'd
was
love
not...
to get her on a show.
Oh, my gosh. That was not exhaustive. Among these...
Yeah.
AKA
Certain rights.
Certain rights. There could be others. And then we go to the Bill of Rights, which they talked very explicitly about enumerated and unenumerated rights, which means there are rights not written down that still exist. So you can't use this argument with people that, oh, well, the only rights you really have are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Still, let's have the abortion conversation. But that aside.
Well, that right to life.
Exactly my point. It's like, so it's always about power, though, right?
Always.
Everybody's working for power. They need more power.
Always.
You need more power. And so maybe you need to go to Energy Ops LLC.
I mean, maybe.
If you're in the South Carolina area, which we were just there with you, South Carolina people, you better be making phone calls. Energy Ops LLC, man, these guys are amazing. He's actually coming down this week. So, Treasure Coast. He's got stuff he's doing on my house. I'm getting some recessed lighting put in, and I'm getting a kitchen light replaced, and I'm getting some stuff, and you got outlets he's doing, and we got some office stuff for him. But there may still be time for you to get some work done. But if you're in the Charleston, South Carolina area, 843-263-1724, 843-263-1724, or you can email at office@energyops.us.
He's doing recessed lighting at your house?
In my bedroom.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, dude. Because all we have is a lamp on one side and then that bathroom thing, the light in there. So I have no lighting overhead. So it's like, I want recessed lighting, man. Let's go. So.
Or maybe amending my policy. Anywho's.
All right. And of course, all of this is always about Trump because it's really what it boils down to, right? Everything leads to, it's Godwin's law for Trump. At some point, it's going to turn back to him. And she noted in her interview that this was in relation to a Trump second term and the fearful control of the small group of Christian nationalists, how they could affect major influence on the Trump presidency. Because it's those dangerous, small, fringe minority Christian nationalists that control everything, right? So where is this all coming from? The PRRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, runs polls on topics regarding political issues and religious values. Now, their ex-posts show a desire to report on the issues within the evangelical and Christian circles. Let's go to slide 3, right? They've posted such things as nearly 2/3 of Americans support legal abortion. The same is true among religious Americans. Majorities of religious Americans support legal abortion. The outliers are white evangelicals, Jehovah's Witnesses, LDS, and Hispanic Protestants. So, of course, they want to report on...
Labels.
Yes. Let's throw labels and let's do abortion stuff. And, of course, white evangelicals are now more tolerant of immoral behavior by elected officials than the average American, reports The Atlantic, citing PRRI data. I really want to know the depths of this data. Do you support Donald Trump? Well, yes. So you support immoral behavior by a politician.
I have yet to see.
It could be as simple as that.
I have yet to see where the Jehovah's Witness and Latter-day Saints support abortion.
I'm wondering if they're saying it's the other way.
No, they're saying here, they've posted says that nearly 2/3 of Americans support legal abortion. The same is true among religious Americans.
Yeah, majorities of religious Americans support legal abortion. The outliers.
I'm sorry. My bad.
Because I would have been like, Jehovah's Witness. No.
A majority of religious Americans support legal abortion.
Again, well, I'm Christian because I went to church once.
But what? Yeah, what constitutes religious?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because religion means that you follow something dogmatically. Like that's what I believe, right? Christ's word never changes.
Right.
He doesn't change. He's immutable. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. You can try to change his doctrine, but you can't. And then you end up becoming the world. When he says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, 1 John. And the love of the world is the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Right? You know what's so funny? Those three things listed in order is how Christ was tempted in the wilderness. Lust of the flesh, eyes, and pride of life. That same exact order. It becomes to where now you are now a part of the world. You're no longer a Christian. So why even call yourself a Christian if you're a part of the world? What's the point of that?
All tradition label, right? And that's where they'll get you, because they'll say, oh, all these Christians support this. But then when you get down into the specifics, okay, how active are they really? They're not really active. They're saying they're Christian because that's the tradition passed down, right? So this survey, slide 4, they surveyed 22,000 people and asked whether they completely agree, mostly disagree, or completely disagree with these statements. I want you in your head to go, do I agree with that or not? The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore.
Which is true.
Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. Okay, now based on these answers, the respondents received a score of adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, or rejectors. And then they just put everybody in their labels. Okay, now I've got the breakdown of the stats, and I can post this up later on in the description. I want to skip this because I really want to get into this concept of state versus religion. This idea of state versus religion, do our rights come from God? That's really the first step. Our rights come from God. We've already put this forward, obviously, in the beginning of this, especially in the Declaration of Independence, right? And Ms. Heidi, she's really got to reckon not just with the Christian nationalists, but with the Declaration of Independence. And the thing is, plenty of governments around the world submit to a higher authority, whether that authority is God, a creator, Allah, or even the sovereign who they revere as a god. Looking at you, North Korea. They place that higher authority above the law, the government system, and the structure that governs the people. So it's not just Christian nationalists that believe there is a higher authority than the government. What they want you to do is go, well, I don't want to be a Christian nationalist, so government must have the full authority. Government must be given the full authority, and I've got to just hand that to them. That's a really dangerous position to take, because what is government for, right? What is government for in a scriptural sense? We'll go to Romans 13, 3 through 7. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same, for it is a minister of God to you for good.
That word minister in the Greek actually meaning a clerical minister, a minister of God, appointed by the Lord to do the right thing under God's auspices. And I'll tell you why, because verse 8
Go for it.
talks about the commandments. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loves another has fulfilled the law. For this thou shalt not commit adultery. So he's going on the commandments, talking about how the king is ordained, that position is ordained of God to do the good thing that God would do to the best of his ability.
And I think what people do with Romans 13, and this just hit me, is they take Romans 13 and they put all of it onto the believer. Just submit to all authorities. Don't ever question the authorities there because God put it in there and they're there for good. But then, like what you're saying, there's this whole description that seems to be like, yeah, but this is the conduct that a government should follow, right? Now, he's not saying, so therefore anarchy, kick off and rebel against all forms of government. What he's saying is, look, there's a standard for the people. There's also a standard for the government. Just like there's a standard for the people, there's a standard for the pastor or the priest or the head of the church, right? There's a standard for the wife. There's a standard for the husband. And so I think sometimes people think, well, there's no standard for government. Government's just going to do whatever it's going to do. No, he's actually laying out a standard of like, what does a good government look like?
That's right.
You know?
And how every citizen has a responsibility because God ordains that thing to happen.
Right.
If God ordains it, then we have a responsibility to be a part of it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Whether by vote, whether by having a prophet check the king, that kind of thing. If God ordains all things on this earth, which Christians are supposed to believe, which I believe most that Christians that answered in a lot of these polls don't understand that. If it's ordained of God, then anything God ordained, the Christian must have a part of.
Right. When would God ordain something and say,
it's a secular.
my people, don't have any part of that?
Yeah,
I
that's
don't want
secular. I ordained it, but it's for evil reasons.
Yeah. My son has the authority of government on his shoulders, but I don't want you to be the body and part of that. What?
That makes no sense.
So the head is disconnected from the body when it comes to government?
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty of people that have asked us, at some point, when do you know enough's enough? If government's going to do it, then we just have to accept that, that if it doesn't change, we can't do anything about it. I'm like, I agree with you. There's nothing we can do if it doesn't change. It doesn't mean we stop.
Right.
That's just like saying, if you're on a losing team in the NFL, do you quit playing football because you have losing seasons? No, you keep playing because that's what you're supposed to do. You feel up and inclined to play football. But it's the same thing in government. Just because it doesn't change does not... if your kids end up corrupt and you've done everything you can as a Christian, do you just give up and say, well, it was their choice? Or do you still continuously pray for them, be a part of their lives, love on them? You know what I mean? It's like it's kind of a weird way to attack that question or to even have that question. But I've had that question tons of times.
Dude, it just hit me. Remember I told you yesterday I saw this post on X, and it just I gave my rebuttal to it, but I just came up with another rebuttal. So somebody posted on X, and they basically said like Daniel was towards the top of the Babylonian government, and he didn't try and turn it into a Christian nation. Who did Nebuchadnezzar give honor to?
That's exactly right. Thank you.
Who did Nebuchadnezzar give praise to? God. So maybe Daniel had an effect on Nebuchadnezzar, right? Like, and Daniel was able to influence of like, hey, this is my God, and my God gives testimony. And Nebuchadnezzar, the one who tried to build a golden idol to himself, saw 4 guys who didn't burn up in the fire, turn around and go, oh, we're going to worship that God now.
Yeah. He even said, I don't know that God, but that's the one we're worshiping. That's the one.
So they did kind of turn it into a godly nation.
And you can't confuse callings with that because David was not specifically told to do that. However, I'm sorry, Daniel. But King David, on the other side, was commanded to keep the commandments of God and run his nation under the auspices of God. And what happened when he didn't do that?
Dun, dun, dun.
Right? All Daniel was doing was he was a part of the government, serving his God the way he was. When the king ordered an edict, he disobeyed it.
In order to
do what? Honor his God.
Honor God, right?
Right?
So
it's such a dumb argument.
He stood up in conviction for his God. And the point I had made to Massey yesterday is, how many prophets went to secular nations and said, God's judgment is coming upon you? Like, maybe God does care about,
And back then, it wasn't about us trying to get in government and change it.
Right.
It was about the Lord saying, you're not your government. So God gave them direct orders. God was the one who established and destroyed nations. It's kind of crazy in this new covenant. It's like, okay, I'm going to leave you to your own devices. I'm going to pace this out, right? Whereas back then, when Joseph got involved, he didn't get out there to change Pharaoh and all these other things. No, but Pharaoh recognized Zephaniah Paneah's got something, dog. That guy's got something. His God, that's trippy. Whatever's happening right there, and look how God blessed the nation. Right? And then it ended up turning on the favor of those who were God's kids. Then they got Goshen. So it's like the Lord kept the remnant, and that was his Old Testament covenants. Whenever things went down, the remnant when they were in secular nations. But let's take it to the flip side. When a secular person or a person who was not of their tribe, when they came in, he said, when you allow the stranger into your city, make sure they understand the commandments, make sure they understand your lifestyle, make sure they understand, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like for you to use that argument to say Daniel didn't change the government for God. Easy, bucko. Daniel changed the government in a sense to show that the king was not the authority of all things. It was God that was the authority of all things.
Thank you, because what happened to Nebuchadnezzar when he said, look at all I've done? God, man, he pounded him with discipline.
There's a massive difference between a Christian government and a Christian nation. The founders didn't want a theocracy.
No.
They didn't want a Christian government. There's a big difference between a Christian government and a Christian nation. Our government was only meant to protect rights, not to be the established state church, not to be the ones that are arbiters of morality, not to be involved in marriage, not to be involved in how you raise your kids, not to be involved in how you spend your money, not to be involved in how you make your money, all these other things. It's just to protect your rights.
Let's get into that, because that's the crux of what he and I are really saying in this. So Romans says, look, it's there that if you do evil, be afraid. Why? Because the government, it's a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. In other words, government is the sword.
That's it.
That's it, right? And the Declaration of Independence actually defends this, right? It says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, we consent to the power of the government saying, you're going to defend our rights. You're going to protect us from evildoers. If somebody commits evil against us, we give you authority to take God's wrath out on that evil person.
Yeah.
Okay? So the government's the sword. Everything gets messed up when the government also becomes the moral compass. And that's the crux of our argument here, is when a government gets out of hand, and a government goes too far and they decide they're the moral compass, now they've become judge, jury, and executioner. Think about why, and this is just hitting me, why would you have the people be the jury? Why would you go and gather the townsfolk, the normal people, and have them be the jury to try their peers? Because what we're witnessing now in our legal system is it's not really your peers that are making the decisions.
Yep.
It's the government. Dude, and
It's the oligarchy.
yeah, and people are just submitting saying, well, government will figure it out, right? And we're watching railroad happening in real time because government has outgrown its only role, right, in terms of Romans, in terms of the Declaration of Independence, is to defend our rights, which means the wrath of God against evildoers who infringe on those rights.
Yeah.
Right?
I wonder if we shouldn't do a poll. Like, I wish these guys would do a poll on the authority of government and ask them this question. Are you submitted to government because they have authority over your life, or you fear what's coming if you don't submit?
Right.
And I can promise you 90% of the people say we fear what could happen if I don't obey. That's not authority, folks. That's tyranny. It's a false authority. The only reason government gets away with things is because they can come in, take everything you have, arrest you, and make you look like a fool with the government-controlled media. This is not authority at all. This is tyranny, what they do. This is not, an authority means I submit to someone that's ahead of me. Pastor, I submit. I'm like, you know what? He's the authority over this place. There's no force if I don't submit. There's none of that stuff.
I willingly submit.
I willfully submit because I see the authority of God in him and the fruit of his life. And I say, you know what? I want to be under that tutelage and that leadership. Who could say that about government?
Right. And I think
it's forced.
And that's what I think Romans was trying to get at is, look, have a willingly submitted nature towards government. But the problem is government ends up using force. I want to go to page 4 and I've got to, unless you really want to do some of these
just because I just want to end this point.
Yeah, go for it.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. How many of us could actually say we've consented ourselves to obey exactly what government is doing right now? No, because if we don't, it's forced on us, right? Mm-hmm. Then he says this, that whenever any form, listen to this Heidi Prisbilla, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people. Who does that come from? You see, Heidi, the reason why rights come from God is because those in government are people just like you. They're people just like me. They have a sinful nature, and this is what Augustus of Hippo talked about. The reason why governments cannot be over you lorded is because they have the same sinful nature that you do. The enlightened thinkers thought this way. Mm-hmm. Frederick Bastiat said that.
Locke destroyed
that
divine lineage argument because
there's no divine character on earth that can lord over you. Why? Because they're the same sinful person that you are. They can do the same stupid things you can do. So why would you willfully submit under somebody, right, as a government authority by a sword? It's different in spiritual matters because you can't be forced to do something in the Christian vernacular. But when you willfully submit to a tyrant that is just like you, all you've done is shown that, number one, you don't have the authority of God in your life because you would willfully submit to a man over God. And Romans 1 says you worship and serve the creature more than you serve the creator. So what we do is we look at the scripture as a whole. This is why governments exist, is to make sure that man is free. The only thing government can do is ward off evildoers and make sure that you can live prosperously under God. That is the purpose of government. That is established vernacular by the founders. It's established in Romans 13, again, and also in 1 Peter 2 as well. The Old Testament Hebrew Republic was based on the fact that we're under God and to God. That's it. No government can take away your right to do what you need to do. That's when pharaohs came. That's when kings came. And guess what they ended up doing? Enslaving the people. And then places like Rome pops up where they enslave people because they were coming against their false authority. Do you see how bad governments can get? And that's so stupid because Caesar was a person like the people. Same sinful, willful nature that he's got.
And for the Christian, let's go scriptural route. Saul is waiting for Samuel to come. Saul's waiting, he's got to fight the Philistines. What does Saul do that Samuel gets mad at him for? He does the sacrifice.
He does, that's right.
Why? Because now he's doing the spiritual, the moral position.
Which is not his role.
The king was never supposed to be the priest. The king was never supposed to be the head of the religious. Why? Because the priest was supposed to be the moral.
This is the separation of church and state.
Exactly. And you notice Christ is both king and priest because he's perfect. He's not a sinful man. David was not supposed to be a priest. David was not supposed to head up the religious side of things. There was supposed to be a high priest, and there was supposed to be a king, right? That's why Melchizedek in the Old Testament is so directly connected to a Christophany, and I fully believe that, because he was both king and priest. Well, there's only one who can do that, Christ, right?
And we've seen the effect of having king and priest in society's past. That's 200 to 300 years ago.
That's what the founders were actually fighting against. When they said we don't want religion and state mixed, what they were saying is we don't want a king who's also our high priest, which is exactly what England fell into. Queen Elizabeth was no pun intended, king of it, right? Because what'd she do? She said, well, the church is under my authority. And all of a sudden, she took church authority under her hands. And you know what happened? Now, all of a sudden, they were forcing people to take oaths against their conscience.
That's exactly right.
And so then the Christians had to fight against that to buy you free speech, to buy you not to self-incriminate. They bought you the Fifth Amendment because they fought against an oath that would have condemned them if they took it, even though their conscience was, they're trying to railroad me.
That's right.
Right? So this whole idea of, well, government's got to be the moral arbiter, and we're seeing it in a secular sense, and that's how we get socialism, that's how we get communism, because everybody, especially on the left, the progressives, what they say is, no, God, we need to put God aside. Okay, so who's the moral arbiter? Well, we are. Oh, that's great. So you not only write and enforce the legislation, but now you're the moral arbiter to determine which ones are moral and immoral.
Right.
That's fun because all of us are sinful. So now, like you were saying, sinful people at top are now telling sinful people at the bottom what they can and can't do.
That's right.
Conflict of interest, right? And so what we're saying is the government is supposed to be the sword. The church is supposed to be the moral compass.
Right. Bingo. Nailed it.
The church, because if the church is not the moral compass for the nation, now that means the sword is the moral compass, and the sword will go wrong. We're all men. We're all going to get it wrong. That's why it's so important to put it back in the hands of a higher authority, because that's a clear standard. That's something we can all go back to.
100%.
Right?
100%. And this is the reason that they had to be separate, because the church has certain things and functions that only they can do. Government has certain functions that only they can do, mainly bearing the sword. The Christian has no authority to bear the sword against another, has no authority to do that, unless, in my opinion, they break and enter into your house and you shoot them and if they die.
Self-defense.
Self-defense. Right? That's the only place a Christian can actually be. They can't be on the offensive like the government can be. They're only on the defense, always on the defense, right? But likely the church is supposed to go out and do the things of the city, the public, making sure the heart is changed. Government is saying now you need to be forced to change your language for people who feel oppressed. You must be forced to believe the way the state says about marriage. You must be forced to understand that this is how we're going to do our schools. You parents cannot have the full authority over kids. See what they're doing? They're now becoming the religious arbiters. They're becoming the arbiters of morality in a way that they never meant to be, because it's not even constitutional for them to do.
Right.
That's the separation of church and state right there.
I bottom of page 4. I want to read this. I'm just going to read it because it was one of those moments where you're like typing and you're like, oh, this is good. So I'm just going to read it. We've bought the lie, hook, line, and sinker. In America, we believe our pride and claims of freest nation on earth is all we need to be free. Now, we're switching a little bit, but there's a reason to it, and I bring it back. Massey and I were talking about this yesterday. This whole idea of like, America, freest nation on earth. You're saying it in your pride and arrogance. We claim in our pride that we have liberty in hopes that our pride and arrogant boasting is enough to produce the result. Or strength, right? Imagine a kid who walks around saying he's a martial arts master. He may believe his own lie after a while, but sooner or later he'll get punched in the mouth and realize that no matter how much the lie is told, he was not actually a martial arts master. That's what we've become. We've got liberty. Our government chose winners and losers across the entire economy. Our government attempted to mandate jabs. Our government forced masks on us with the threat of fines and jail time. Our government can seize our bodies and throw them in front of machine guns like meat shields. Our government seizes our money at every single turn with the threat of violence if we don't willingly give it up. Our government uses levers of coercion and force to control our language, aka the Twitter files, FBI investigating parents at school board meetings, conviction of people praying in front of deletion clinics, destruction of anybody within the realm of the insurrection, and obvious legal system persecution with the intent to crush someone financially, as per what may have gone down with the CIA and Alex Jones. Our government uses our tax dollars to suppress and destroy nations around the world while also paying other nations to fight our wars for us. Our government has completely destroyed any semblance of a border and then attacked states in the courts for attempting to defend those borders. Are you free? Do you feel free? Do you feel like you have liberty? But the thing is, our government believes they are being moral. They're moral busybodies.
That's exactly, in name only.
That is the individual at every level of government. Stop thinking of them as a soulless, monolith entity. They are a collection of individuals who all have their own aims, desires, goals, fears, insecurities, principles, and needs. The vast majority of them want two things: make things better and protect their job. They're moral busybodies, and many of them have no desire to bring their moral compass under submission of God.
So where do they get their morality? That's the question.
Exactly. We get a boatload of people who set out to protect their job by trying to prove their worth through new initiatives, new laws, new regulations, new controls, new programs, new offerings. So they pretty much produce two things: laws and regulations, aka limitations on our individuality, and redistribution, social programs, grants, subsidies, government projects. Redistribution is a taking of your resources for their morality, which further limits your ability to do what is good, righteous, and moral.
Dude, imagine if the church forced its congregants, which some do. They're not the church.
Could you imagine? Close the doors, lock them, pull out guns.
That's right. If you don't tithe, you're done, which no church does that.
We're taking your house if you don't tithe enough.
They may preach coercively, but not lock them in.
But not forcefully.
But man, if you don't pay your taxes to give what we're doing to make sure that we give to an abortion clinic, you're going to jail, buddy.
Yeah.
Wesley Snipes.
If you don't pay $1,100 in property tax, we'll seize your whole house. What about the excess? We can't give that
I want
back
to read the rest of this line.
Yeah,
He said, so they pretty much produce two things: laws, regulations. He just read this. Limitations on individuality and redistribution, social programs, grants, subsidies, government projects. Redistribution is a taking of your resources for their morality, which further limits your abilities to do what is good, righteous, and moral. It limits you from, and then when you go out and try to do the right, moral, and good thing, they come back at you and say, no. You only can do what we allow you to do.
There was a perfect example. There was a barbecue joint, and it was, Kansas City. And every year what they would do is they would do a bunch of food.
Yep. And this is just one example.
And after this big barbecue or whatever was left over, they'd give to the homeless shelters. Well, because it wasn't a sanctioned event and they didn't have their license, thousands of pounds of meat was thrown away because it didn't fit the regulations.
Right.
Did you know grocery stores, any food that's returned, they are required by law to throw it away? And I had a friend who worked at a grocery store in Michigan. Now, if you're from Michigan, Myers, or Ohio a little bit, she worked at Myers. She worked the return desk. You know what people would do? They'd go and buy $200 worth of groceries. They'd pay for it with their EBT card. Then they'd return all the groceries immediately at the return desk. And Myers was required to take it, so they took it. They gave cash back. It was a cash exchange thing that people would do. So instead of having to use the EBT card, the food stamp card, in order to buy food, they wanted to get their $200 to go buy whatever. Well, all that food that literally made its track from the checkout over to the desk, legally, Myers had to throw it away. Because legal, because regulation, because law. You are not allowed to be moral and righteous and good unless government tells you, well, you can do it in this context.
That's exactly it. But you can be immoral to return groceries for cash.
Oh, heck
because
yeah.
government allows it to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll keep liquor stores and strip clubs open during the pandemic because, those are needed.
Essential.
Essential services is a liquor store. This is what happens when your government becomes the moral arbiter.
That's right.
And that's what Heidi wants. Heidi wants the government to be your moral compass.
So the state doesn't want separation of church and state.
No.
They want to become the church.
They want church. They want the Christian church out of the way.
So they can be the church.
Exactly.
So they can be the ones to be believed in. You don't believe me? Go talk to any congressman or woman. I'm being honest about this. Mostly on the left. They don't care what you think. They're going to do what they want to do. Do you know why? Because they want to make sure that their morality is put on you and forced. That's exactly what they want.
And that's exactly what it is,
and it's
right?
demonic and it's devilish. And I won't submit to it.
Because what happens is they run on a campaign of, we're going to change this, we're going to fix this, right? They get into office and they realize either A, I can't do anything.
They can't even change their own underwear, right?
Or B, they're like, well, I'm going to change and I'm going to make effect. And just like I said, what are the two ways they most often make change or effect in your life? Writing new laws and regulations to control you, or taking your money for their little pet projects that they think are moral and good. And they're fighting for their job. They're trying to make their job worth it. All of these people in these bureaucratic areas, organizations, right? The three-letter agencies, you know what they're doing? They're working to ensure that the budget doesn't get cut for next year because then they might lose their job. So they have to do just enough to ensure that, well, we need this budget. And at the same time, they look at you and they go, well, I need to make myself valuable, so we'll come up with a new regulation. We'll enforce this regulation. And so they actually pit themselves against you thinking, I'm moral because I'm pitting myself against the individual, against the people. The more I can control them, the more I'm doing moral good. And it finds its zenith, its apex, in the communist dictatorship.
100%.
Because all of the morality ends up crawling up the pyramid like this nasty, poisonous spider, and it sits at the top in a Stalin or a Mao or a Kim Jong. It becomes a single person who is both king and priest in a worldly form. All of a sudden, Stalin can say, you die, you die, you die, you die, keep you, you die, keep you, and that's moral. All of a sudden, Stalin can say, the kulaks, get rid of them. Moral. Mao can decide, well, I come forward with this philosophy on how we should, farm and do agriculture. Millions die, but to protect Mao and protect his leadership, his moral authority, well, we'll keep going with it. We can't admit we were wrong. Kim Jong-un's people are starving, and they cry and fawn and talk about how he's a god who could ride a horse at 3. This is insanity because we're watching the march as Americans, and we've got a person like Heidi going, no, God's not the authority, it's the government. You just want a dictatorship.
150%. Governments only want more one thing only, and they want more of it all the time is power. And when you give them that taste, that inch, they're going to take it a mile. And I think that's where one of the reasons we exist is to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of just wanting them to have more power, that our authority lies in God and that we can do these things, that we feel that the call is self-evident is to bring people back to that moral structure, that they derive their authority and their just powers from us. And we can say we can stay out of it, but ultimately what you're doing is setting up your own demise. And we've done a gross disservice to me as the evangelical Pentecostal church to say, well, it's all prophesied anyway. It's like, yeah, you know why? Because the love of many would wax cold, because we wouldn't care anymore, because we would take our responsibility away from what we were called to be. And then we'd end up, it's so funny that in this nation, the First Amendment was written to protect us from persecution of our religion by a government, not the people. The people always persecute you. That's normal. That's biblical.
That's due course.
Due course. But where government couldn't come in and infringe on your rights as a religious person. Now we're seeing it happen because people didn't want to be involved. And then you blame it on prophecy. See, God said this would happen.
You know what?
That's so stupid.
I saw something this morning, and this kind of flicked this upward, where in Matthew, Christ says, away from me, I never knew you, right? But we prophesied in your name, and we cast demons out of your name. Away from me, sons of lawlessness, I never knew you, right? And somebody was explaining, if you look at the context of all of the description before that, Christ is talking about love, how you have to have love. Love is the defining factor, right? And if we look at that, we look at what Paul talks about, the greatest of these is love. You can do all the spiritual gifts, but if you don't have love, what does it matter, right? Think about that. What you just said. Well, prophecy says, so, why bother? You don't have love. You don't have love for your people. You don't have love to do the war the day in, day out because you're leaning on the prophecy. The prophecy is the excuse for you.
That's right.
It's the same as, well, we're going to get raptured to heaven anyway, so I might as well sit back and wait for Jesus. That's not love for your people.
You wicked and slothful servant, dude. You wicked and slothful servant.
Dude, it makes so much sense. Like, that's what has bugged us so long about this whole, well, prophecy says, so why bother? America's going to fall, and the world's going to fall, and Christ's going to come back. So all the more you should have love for your people and be fighting. You should be fighting. You should be standing up every single day and going, that's not right. People, come back to God. Put God as your authority, because we're talking as much to a Heidi as we are to the Christians who are like, it doesn't really matter. Government's the authority. No, God's your authority. And if you don't recognize that, you don't realize that, you've forsaken love for God over all things, because that gets hairy.
That's right.
That gets rough. So government is the sword. The church, Christ's body, not just the structure, authority of the church, Christ's body is supposed to be the moral compass. And when you get those two mixed, when you, in the sense of the sword becomes the moral compass, or the moral compass becomes the sword, you get into a real dangerous situation. And what we're pointing out is the government today, and go back to the beginning. We said government is ordained of God. So those of you in the U.S. government, the authority of the U.S. government is ordained by God. We're not questioning that. But we're saying is you stepped out of your bounds. That's really the Old Testament prophet in a nutshell. I'm not calling us Old Testament prophets. I'm just saying, what's our mission? We're pointing our finger at the government saying you've stepped out of your bounds. You've taken on the righteous moral decisions. They're not the case. God's supposed to be the authority.
100%.
So, guys, by all means, if you like content like this, if you get fed by this type of stuff, please subscribe, hit that notification bell. I still have people messaging me like, dude, I've gotten every notification bell I can clicked, and I still don't get notified. Apologize. The vast majority, 99% of the time, we're on 11 a.m. Fridays and Mondays, so you can catch it then. And check out our channels and all that. We got stuff we post daily. But most of all, we love you guys.
We love you.
We absolutely love you, and we want you to live free in Christ. Now, that doesn't mean you won't get persecuted. It doesn't mean you won't be martyred. None of that. We're not trying to sell you prosperity for life and all of that. What we're trying to tell you is Christ loves you. We love you. We want you to live a full, abundant life with the expectation of eternal life with him. That's what matters to us. So we love you guys. We cherish you. Please reach out. Man, Massey, Mike, we love you guys. Have a great weekend.